Now, this next clip right here is a clip that is really important. It has a political correspondent here in North Carolina who's got some really good insight, in my view, of the situation. And he brings up valid points that literally no one else is bringing up about the situation. Because to me, this isn't about so much an affair as it's about the issues that he's going to talk about here in a second. And he phrases it and says it in a way better than I feel like I ever could.
Allegations in the lawsuit are true. This is unprecedented in North Carolina politics.
That's Dan McCorkle, a Democratic political strategist in Charlotte. In the lawsuit, Scott Lassiter claims his wife, Jamie Lyles Lassiter, and Moore started their affair in or around 2019, and it continued through and beyond January of this year. Lassiter says he started surveilling his wife this past December after hearing rumors. In the lawsuit, Lassiter claims Jamie told him she was going to a movie with a friend, but when he followed her, she went to dinner with Moore and then back to Moore's house.
So I'd also like to point out something. I have not looked up the ages of these two people, but I've just been giving this a lot of thought. And tell me what you think. Does this guy, in my opinion, I think that this man, the House Speaker, looks substantially older than this woman here. Correct me if I'm wrong. Like, if I'm wrong, like, just let me know. Like, tell me. I have not looked up the ages of these people. I'm trying really hard to just be very fair, very balanced, very respectful of everyone in this really high-profile, contentious, explicit type of situation going on out here in North Carolina. But I really think this man looks substantially older than this woman here. And by all accounts, he is the most powerful person in politics in North Carolina right now. And this woman is not. So there's like a position of power here that is pretty blatant, in my opinion, and that is being pointed out by many people. And that alone brings up a lot of thoughts and questions and thoughts, which this wonderful person, this man, is going to actually talk about more.
Lassiter said Jamie didn't come home until the next day, and that's when he confronted her. Lassiter claims Jamie said she feared ending the affair with Moore would result in her losing her job at the NC Conference of Clerks.
If any of this is true, it's textbook sexual harassment, favors for jobs. Not only that, if you don't do this, you may lose your job. I mean, that goes beyond any kind of personal affair, especially as it involved government employees.
Just mentioned here, this man is really important because he is pointing out abuse of power and of position, potentially, if these allegations are true. People aren't really focusing on that, and he even mentioned, like, he called it textbook sexual harassment. Look, I don't know what the hell textbook sexual harassment really consists of. I'm not going to even try to get into that again. I'm not aware. I have not been to law school, period. But he's pointing out some really interesting stuff where it's like, okay, yeah, there's this legal thing going on. It's a complaint, aka lawsuit, pending right now in Wake County Court about this married couple, legally married couple, with alienation, affection, criminal conversation law. Okay, but then there's this, that's like the tip of the iceberg, in my view, and the views of many people, which is why this is such a big story. There's all these layers underneath it, and the layers underneath it is, you got this North Carolina House Speaker in this huge position of power, you have this other person who's like arguably a subordinate. I mean, he seems to be, his statements, I have a lot of problems with the House Speaker's statements that he's making to the public, so I'm trying really hard to avoid even commenting on that too much, aside from what I've shown and that's quoted in the news and I'm able to show. I don't believe what's being said by the House Speaker, if I'm being brutally honest. And I think that his position, and regardless of the woman's marital status, I think his position and her position and this relationship are highly problematic and extremely questionable.
A few days after finding out about the affair, Lassiter said he confronted Moore at a Biscuitville in Raleigh, and Moore admitted to having a sexual relationship with Lassiter.
Okay, so this Biscuitville, I will be going to this shortly. I'm literally going to the exact same Biscuitville news clip. And this Biscuitville now has become the topic of a national news article regarding people that were like in politics and lawyers going to local Southern food chains and doing things they're not supposed to be doing. So it was a funny article I read that included this chain. This chain's actually getting a lot of free advertising now because of all this. And one of their their online reviews, it stated, a person did, "Oh, this is the place where such and such met such and such, the House Speaker, da 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 da," and put it all in there and gave them like 5 stars for being the location. And the Biscuitville location, they actually responded. And we're like, "Thanks. We're so grateful to have raving fans like you." And so I will be going to this Biscuitville. No, I'm not kidding. And I'm going to be taking pictures and posting them on social media. I looked at their menu. It looks delicious. I've never been there before. Heard of it in passing. And the reviews, people are quite happy with them overall. So looking forward to trying out Biscuitville, the meeting location for the situation.
Jamie. Lassiter also claims Moore offered to help him in, quote, any way he could, politically, towards the end of their meeting.
Speaker Moore was literally one of the most powerful speakers of the House in the nation. With Governor Cooper not having veto power, Speaker Moore was literally at the apex of his influence and power with the North Carolina General Assembly. And to have this happen, this is going to upset, as they say, upset the apple cart in an unprecedented way.
McCorkle thinks due to Moore's success for the Republican Party throughout the last few months, Republican voters will more than likely look past this scandal and the allegations come 2024. But he's not sure he can say the same for unaffiliated voters.
Unaffiliated voters, of course, the number one voters in Mecklenburg and North Carolina, and they are not as staunch. As a Democrat, I'll vote for a yellow dog. Republicans, they'll vote pretty much for a Republican. It's that middle ground that decides elections now.
Well, Jamie Lassiter released a statement saying, in part, quote, Scott has serious mental health and substance abuse issues, which I can only assume led him to file this outrageous and defamatory suit. Well, the claims are not only false, but impossible, as we've been separated with a signed separation document for years, end quote. You can find the rest of her statement on our website at qcnews.com. Representative Moore also released a statement calling the lawsuit baseless.
Very controversial, to say the very least. Very contentious topics here. Factual background. On June 1st, 2013, plaintiff, this is the husband, the plaintiff, was lawfully married to Mrs. Lassiter. And plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter, collectively the Lassiters, lived continuously together as husband and wife in North Carolina from June 1st, 2013 until they separated from each other on or about January 11th, 2023. As a result of defendant Tim Moore's adulterous extramarital relationship with Mrs. Lassiter. Plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter met in college and had been in a relationship with each other for more than 10 years at the time of their separation. Defendant Tim Moore willfully interfered with the marital relationship between Mrs. Lassiter and plaintiff, while plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter were happily married and living together in Wake County, North Carolina. At the time, defendant Tim Moore began pursuing I redacted this due to explicit content, relationship with Mrs. Lassiter. Defendant Tim Moore was aware that plaintiff and Mrs. Lassiter were happily married to each other and living together. In support of this allegation, plaintiff shows the court as follows. Defendant Tim Moore and Mrs. Lassiter worked together in her capacity as the executive director of the NC Conference of Clerks. Mrs. Lassiter frequently interacted with defendant Tim Moore to advocate for her organization. A photo of defendant Tim Moore and Mrs. Lassiter together at work event in December 2022 is attached here too as Exhibit B and incorporated by reference herein. Again, I'm not covering the exact picture exhibits. It's a bit much for me, but they are publicly available. And I think I showed this already at some of the exhibits I did in news articles that were covered in newscasts. Upon information and belief, defendant Tim Moore saw Mrs. Lassiter consistently wearing a wedding band from the time that they began working together prior to 2017 through January 11th, 2023. C. Plaintiff Mrs. Lassiter and defendant Tim Moore are all actively involved in the North Carolina Republican Party. Then they have an acronym for that. The Lassiters attended many NCGOP functions as a couple and often interacted with defendant Tim Moore at these events. As recently as December 12th, 2022, defendant Tim Moore attended